Well, many of the Osbourne family have been in the news recently, but it's the kids that we know from the Osbournes TV show, Kelly and Jack, who have piqued my interest, both in the news for sobriety, but for two very different reasons, and I think we have a lot to learn from both.
I'm JT. I'm in my mid-30s, have a 10-year media career, and nearly a decade of sobriety. So how did another middle-class kid turn into a blackout drunk and a heroin junkie? More importantly, how did it change, and where do we go from here? This is my story.
Okay, so first, I think it's really important for us to consider what both of these kids' growing up environment was like. They're both around my age, mid-upper 30s, and number one, their father is the Prince of Darkness, okay? So their dad is Ozzy Osbourne, one of the most notorious rockers and drug addicts ever in music, celebrity, anything. He would be at the top of it, okay? Number two, they have a very powerful and engaging and magnanimous mother. So just right there off the bat, think about what your home life is growing up, okay? Then on top of all that, you thrust both these kids into the limelight of celebrity. And not just like they were on a TV show or the paparazzi was following them around a lot because their dad was famous. No, they were the literal pioneers of family-style reality TV, meaning they had cameras on them 24/7 as young teenagers. Okay, so I think when you factor all of that in, there's almost no chance that any kid in that situation would have any outcome other than to have had at least some negative experience with drugs and alcohol. I mean, you're just like lining up, setting them up to fall into that themselves. And that's not even to consider all the genetic stuff that goes into it. So I think when you consider all those factors, anything short of they're dead or in jail, I think is cause to want to look at what they've done right, what they've done wrong. I don't have all those answers. They've been noticeably up to this point, I think they've talked about it here and there, but they haven't, done a running diary on their lives with drugs and sobriety like most people don't. So I can't exactly speak to their experience or their headspace, but they were both in the news recently because Jack just celebrated, I believe it's 18 years of sobriety, which is amazing. He got sober like when he was 18. And from what I can tell, he lived a lot before getting sober at 18. I think it's really interesting. I know when I got sober at 25, I got sober around kids who had gotten sober when they were 19. I was like, how could you even have known? Like, how could you have even lived a life? People said that to me, like, how could you have even had enough experiences before 25? And of course, I said, look, I've had enough. I've had enough experiences, and I can recount them for you. And I'm sure with a kid like him, with the home life he had and the access he had, I mean, also factor in like being on MTV in the early 2000s when it was still MTV, okay? Going on the spring breaks, having all that access in front of you to party, to get into trouble, to have awesome, exciting adventures. So I totally believe that if he thought he was ready to get sober at 18, and he thought he needed to experience no more in the life of drugs and alcohol, I fully believe, and clearly, look, it's worked out. But he's the first one, he's the positive one, because he just celebrated an incredible length of sobriety from getting sober at a young age with all that history. And here's what he had to say about it. It was in a post. He said, "It's not that it gets easier or harder. It's just that it's life on life's terms." By the way, that is a very famous quote from the 12 Steps. He wrote in the caption, "If anyone is trying to get sober, know that it is possible if you are willing to do the work." Again, just hearing tons of recovery from his quote here. "Sending lots of love to my people who have been in this jober with me. Hashtag sobers better." Now, again, he posted this, but also I pulled from People magazine to get this quote. And again, I'm hearing tons of stuff in there that is pulled straight from the rooms, straight from the big book, straight from the 12 steps. And while the naked eye might say, well, that's kind of cliche. He's just going to the generic terms and throwing them in there. I'll tell you, from my experience, having been sober almost 10 years, when I hear and see those things in people's actions and words, to me, that gives encouragement. To me, that tells me they're really doing the deal. And there's a reason for that. Like, at least from my perspective, the reason I go back to those cliches from recovery is, number one, because they're true, they work. And that means that I am pulling from a tried and true source that it was so effective that it was a cliche when I went into the rooms. And it's so effective now that I feel to still pull from it because they're so true. That's why. That's why they're cliches, because they're so true. You can't poke holes in them. Anyway, so when I see a celebrity in recovery reference words like that, I don't go to the cynical place of, oh, well, they're just, it's really hard to BS in this world. And I think that when I see Jack using terms like that, I don't think twice about it. I go, I'm really happy for this guy. I can't believe that's an incredible length of sobriety, especially with all he's been through. Now, granted, these kids have had, ostensibly, they have had every opportunity. They have not wanted for money or shelter or food throughout their life. But I don't believe that protects anyone from mental health issues, and especially not from addiction. In the case of them, I think they were more prone to lean into addiction. So look, I bring up Jack first because it's an incredibly positive story, but let's look at the juxtaposition with his younger sister Kelly in the news at the same time, because she relapsed. Okay, so she has made a bunch of statements. She did a long form conversation with Dax Shepard, and she too said a bunch of things that, while, I'm really sorry for her that she had to go through relapse. She said she had about 4 years of sobriety, which is awesome, before this happened. I think what she said is really important for all of us to look at and to consider on the opposite end of the spectrum, but also with some correlations with her brother. So I pulled this from USA Today, but again, this was from her conversation with Dax Shepard, which I listened to in its entirety. She talks about what happened over the past year. She did relapse, maybe not, I think, directly because of shutdowns and COVID and everything, but her experience with what happened in 2020 led to her relapse. So she tells Dax, I started doing the online meetings. I didn't like them. I'm right there with you, Kelly. I didn't like the online meetings either. I still have to go to them from time to time because even here in Texas, churches are not full-time letting AA groups, even mine, who's been there for 20 years, I think. It's still a little bit touch and go. It's very hard. She says, the best part about going to an AA meeting is that you don't have to look at your expletive self. That is so incredibly wise. I had not even ever considered that point. I think of it in terms of, I have the physical connection. I'm in the literal room with someone. If you've ever seen someone speak or seen live performance, that being there is always more effective, more tangible, more visceral. But I also think when I go into a meeting, this is my opportunity to not be only thinking about myself, because my disease manifests itself in that I am always thinking about me, always thinking about my problems. And that's one of the best things that recovery has ever given to me, is it gives me a space to not focus on my crap and to focus on other people instead. And yes, most meetings you go around and you get to you finally, and I'd be lying if I said there weren't times where I went into meetings and instead of listening to what everyone else had to say, I was thinking about my stuff. But a lot of times what I force myself to do when I'm really in a bad kind of phase, but I also don't feel like it's so bad that I have to have what we call a burning desire, like I just have to get it out, I'll force myself. I'll go, I'm not going to talk tonight. I'm only going to listen. Even if I have to white knuckle it and my head's somewhere else, I'm going to hear what someone else has to say tonight. But to also not have to look at yourself, I think that's really fascinating. And she referenced like people on these meetings, and this really, it sounds kind of like LA stereotypes, but people doing workouts in the middle of the meetings, and that's got to be tough. She went on to say she eventually started getting up at 5 a.m. to do meetings overseas because they don't, let that stuff happen. I can tell you, I've never been on a Zoom meeting here in my Texas meetings that would, be okay with that sort of thing going on. Anyways, I just thought that was really interesting. Next part of her quote, talking about getting out of her good habits into bad. Slowly but surely, I stopped calling my sponsor. Slowly but surely, I stopped connecting with my girls, her other friends in the program. Slowly but surely, one girl relapsed, then another, then all my friends relapsed. And again, I want to bring this up because I'll tell you, and you can ask anyone you know with long-term sobriety, it happens this way all the time. It happens this way all the time. You always hear the same thing. Hey, you relapsed. What happened? Well, I stopped going to meetings. I stopped connecting with people in the program. And the reason those things are usually the things people point to is because this structure in our life has been helpful for a reason. Even if you can't say that something in that meeting is contributing directly to you not drinking today, that regiment, that making it part of your everyday life, that showing up for others and showing up to hear other people, it makes a real impact. And again, it's always something people point to when relapse happens. So she goes on to say, 2 weeks, I'm sorry, I skipped a part. She goes on to talk about how her relapse happened. And again, I've seen this. I've experienced myself before I got sober for good. She was sitting out by a pool. She hadn't been to a lot of meetings. She hadn't been connecting with her people. She hadn't been doing the deal. And she saw someone else with champagne by the pool. And she thought, I can have champagne. Things are good in my life. And so she did. And you've heard me say this before. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Nothing bad happened when she had that glass of champagne. And nothing really happened the next time. But she goes on to say, 2 weeks later, done. Did embarrassing stuff, blacked out. In my mind, I was still in control. It wasn't until I found myself last weekend covered in ranch dressing by my friend's pool, sunburnt, looking like a piece of blank, that I was like, maybe I don't have this under control. And again, I think this is important to point out because you've heard me describe this as what I think would happen if I relapse. I've told you many times, sure, it could be that I relapse and that night after having one beer, I find my next heroin connection and I'm off to the races that night. That's possible. What I think is more likely is I would be fine the first time and maybe the next time I'd be okay, but it wouldn't be long, in her case 2 weeks, before I was off the rails again. And this is why you gotta be really careful with this stuff. And I just wanted to bring it up and run through the quotes because I'm telling you, it's no different for celebrities with all the access. And that's what I love so much about Kelly being so honest about it, is she knows. She knows that she's not special. She knows that this is the same thing that happens to so many people because she's heard it a million times before. And so she knows that she is not exempt from this same kind of self-defeating, slow burn, then quick relapse, because it happens all the time like this. And that's why I was so happy to hear both of their stories. It is kind of ironic, maybe it's a little spiritual, that he had his birthday and that she had her relapse, and they're both in the news around the same time. But in both their cases, and I will say, unlike what we experienced with Demi Lovato, Kelly, I hear the words of a person who I think is probably going to be okay. I hear the words of a person who knows where they erred and immediately recognized that they made some really easy mistakes to make. But again, they're the ones that they are cliche. We always point to those are the things that happen before a relapse. And And I think her ability to accept that and point that out and go, I'm not above that. I love to hear that. If someone's going to relapse, and I don't wish it on anyone, I hope they have the experience that Kelly Osbourne just had. Because from what I hear, I think she's going to get back on the horse. It sounds like she already is. But I find it very encouraging. I can only hope that if I ever relapse, I don't think I'm going to, but it could happen to me or anyone, I could only hope that I would have this kind of resolve to not only get back on the horse and get back into meetings and realize what I did, not face the shame, not be too downtrodden to face the shame and guilt of having done it, but also go out and tell the world, not that as many people are listening to me as her, but also go out and publicly say that I did it. I've talked about this with you before. I would hope that if it happened to me, I would be able to come and be honest with you about it. But I don't know. I don't know what my resolve is going to be in that situation because it hasn't happened to me before. But I commend her for doing this. And it is so important for someone like me and for people like us all over the world to hear people who not only who have had strength and success like her brother, but at the same time, in the same damn family, people who have tried and failed and are back up trying again. So kudos to you, Kelly. Kudos to you, Jack. I'm very thankful, although I wish you guys hadn't had to feel the heartache. Jack, you 18 years ago, Kelly, you just this past week to get there. I'm thankful that you're sharing it with us. All right, let's get the mail. Some great mail today. I want to start with Joseph Miguel. He commented on YouTube, just a generic comment that I really appreciated. Joseph said, "So glad I found JT in this channel. Straightforward sobriety talk, not preachy, and communicated the way I need. Thank you." Man, Joseph, thank you. You just described exactly how I want this to come off. I think I don't do it perfectly every time, and I'm still kind of feeling myself out on how to do this. But if you had woke me up in the middle of the night and said, JT, what do you want to get out of this YouTube thing you're doing? I would have said something like this. I hope I can just give something real that is from my own experience that does not sound like I'm judging or preaching, and that I communicate it in a way that people hear and understand. So, Joseph, thank you for that feedback. It's been quite possibly the best feedback I've gotten yet. I really appreciate it. Next, we have Black Phoenix Risen. She says, "I truly believe," and this is a comment on Instagram about the video on making sacrifices to get where you are, but losing things in that pursuance of your goals. She says, "I truly believe everything is for a reason. Sacrifices, hardships, everything is an opportunity for you to mold yourself into a better person that will have better circumstances in the future. And on top of all that, you will have gained wisdom from your experiences that you can pass on to help others." Wow. I wish I had communicated that sentiment as well in the video, because that is an incredible view on things, and I really appreciate you sharing it with us. If you would like to share your feedback, I would certainly appreciate to hear it. You can comment on the videos. You can comment when I post them on Instagram or Facebook. You can DM me at any of the following places. If you ask me not to share, I will not do that. Anything that is commented on publicly, that's fair game. But if you want to have a private conversation, feel more than welcome to DM as well. That's it. We'll see you next time. Hey, family, if you like what we're doing here and you want to see more, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Share it with someone who you think might benefit from watching this. And feel free to comment below. Love.